She never changed it, my husband's eldest said, not looking at me. The will stands as written. You should have known. I had driven 2 hours to get to that office, through February sleet, past the Tim Hortons where Gordon and I used to stop every Sunday without fail. I had worn the navy blazer he always liked. I had brought the folder. I didn't say anything, not then. Gordon died on a Thursday in November. Quietly, the way he did most things. No drama, no fuss, just a call from the hospital at 6 in the morning and then a silence in the house that I still haven't gotten used to. We had been married for 19 years. We met when we were both 51, both certain that kind of thing was behind us. He used to say I was the best surprise of his later life. I used to tell him he saved mine. He had 3 children from his first marriage. His son, who was 44 and worked in finance in Calgary, his older daughter, 41, who had moved to Vancouver with her husband, and his younger daughter, 37, who still lived nearby in Guelph, close enough that we saw her at least once a month. She was the one who called me the night it happened. She was the one who cried on the phone. I had my own children, too. 2 daughters from my first marriage, both grown, both living their lives in different cities. But Gordon and I, we were each other's household, each other's daily life. 19 years of Sunday morning drives, of splitting the newspaper, of arguing over whether to keep the thermostat at 19 or 21 degrees. 19 years of building something together. His first wife, Margaret, had passed away 15 years before I ever knew him. Cancer. He had raised the 3 children mostly alone through the worst of it, and for some time after. He talked about her kindly. I never felt threatened by her memory. That wasn't what happened between us. What happened was slower and quieter and harder to name. The trouble started before Gordon was cold in the ground, not dramatically, not the way it does in stories. It started with small things. The son called the funeral home directly without telling me and gave instructions about the arrangements. I found out when the funeral director asked me to confirm a decision I hadn't made. The older daughter flew in and stayed with her brother's friend instead of with me, which stung, though I told myself grief does strange things to people. His younger daughter, the one who'd cried with me on the phone, pulled me aside at the reception and said she was sorry. Just that. She couldn't say more. I thought that was the shape of it. Grief pulling people in different directions. I thought we would find each other again, on the other side of it. I was wrong. Gordon had made his will years ago, before me, before Margaret even died. He had updated it once, in 2009, when the children were still young adults and the world looked a certain way. He had always meant to revisit it. He said so more than once. I remembered an evening at the kitchen table, bills spread between us, and him saying he needed to call a lawyer, get things sorted properly. I told him not to be morbid. He laughed and poured more wine. What I didn't know, what he hadn't told me or perhaps hadn't realized himself, was that he had signed a document. 8 months before he died, when we both knew the illness was progressing, he had gone to a lawyer alone. I thought it was about the medical directive, the power of attorney we had discussed. I had mine done at the same time with a different appointment. What Gordon had actually signed was more than that. He had spoken to his son at length, apparently. His son who worked in finance. His son who had opinions. The estate meeting was set for the 3rd week of February, 12 weeks after Gordon passed. I drove down the highway in the sleet, past the Tim Hortons, with the folder on the passenger seat. I had brought it because a lawyer I'd spoken to, a woman named Frances, who worked out of a small office in Hamilton and who had handled my own affairs for 20 years, had told me to bring everything. Every document with both our names, every financial record I had access to, the cohabitation agreement we had signed before we married, just a formality, Gordon had said. His son had suggested it, and I had agreed because I had nothing to hide and nothing to fear. Frances had looked at that agreement for a long time when I brought it to her, 3 weeks after Gordon died. She had asked me several questions I wasn't expecting. Then she had made some calls. Then she had handed me a different document and told me to read it carefully. I brought that document, too, in the folder. The lawyer's office was on the 4th floor of a building in downtown Hamilton, one of those older buildings with the slow elevator and the frosted glass on the office doors. The administrative assistant brought us water and set out a box of tissues, which felt both thoughtful and ominous. His son had arrived before me, his older daughter too. His younger daughter came in just behind me, touched my arm briefly, didn't smile. I didn't blame her. The estate lawyer, a man I had never met before, recommended by the son, arranged some papers in front of him and waited for everyone to settle. I sat down. His son looked at the chair I had chosen, which was across the table from him, and something passed across his face. He looked at his older sister. She looked at her hands. "Before we begin," his son said, addressing the lawyer rather than me, "I want to be clear that my father's estate is a family matter. His personal relationships in later life don't change what he intended." I set my folder on the table. "Of course," the lawyer said, in the way lawyers do when they are not agreeing but also not disagreeing. His younger daughter was quiet across from me. She was holding her own folder and she was studying the surface of the table. The lawyer began. Gordon had left his financial assets split in percentages to his 3 children. The house, our house, the one we had bought together and renovated together, where I had lived for 14 years, was in Gordon's name alone, technically speaking, though we had both contributed to the mortgage, both paid for the kitchen reno, both planted the garden in the backyard that took us 3 summers to get right. The house, per the will, was to be sold, proceeds divided among the children. "You were not named," the estate lawyer said to me, almost gently. "His instructions did not include you in the distribution." His son exhaled. Not quite a sigh, something quieter. A settling. "I want to be fair," he said to me then, for the first time addressing me directly. "You can have reasonable time to find somewhere to go. We're not unreasonable people." His older daughter still hadn't looked up. I thought about Gordon pouring wine. I thought about the kitchen table. I thought about Frances sitting across from me in her Hamilton office, sliding a document across the desk and saying, "Read this carefully." I opened the folder. "There are 2 things," I said. The room went quiet in the particular way rooms do when something is about to shift. I set the first document on the table. It was a copy of the cohabitation agreement that Gordon and I had signed before our marriage. The one his son had suggested, the formality, the nothing to fear document. I had read it many times since Frances handed it back to me. The relevant clause was on page 4. Frances had highlighted it in yellow. In the event of the death of either party, the surviving spouse retains the right to continue residing in the shared primary residence for a period not less than the duration of the marriage or until such time as the surviving spouse voluntarily vacates or remarries. 19 years of marriage. The clause was binding. The estate lawyer looked at it for a long moment and then looked at his own notes. His son reached across the table and picked it up. He read it twice. Something moved through his face that I didn't have a name for. "That could be contested," he said. "It could," I said. "Frances agrees it could. She also agrees it would be a lengthy process and expensive, and that the clause as written is quite standard and quite clear." I let that sit for a moment. Then I set the second document on the table. Frances had made calls. Frances had a contact at the law firm Gordon had visited 8 months before he died. Not the estate lawyer in front of me now. A different firm, a smaller one in the West End. Gordon had gone there twice. The second visit had produced a document. A codicil, a formal amendment to his original will, signed, witnessed. Dated the 5th of March, 14 months before he died. In it, Gordon had directed that I receive the contents of one specific account, a joint savings account we had opened together, the one we called our travel fund, that by the time of his death held just over $60,000. He had also directed that a piece of land he owned in Bruce County, a property he'd inherited from his father that none of the children had ever shown interest in, be transferred to me outright. The estate lawyer had not mentioned either of these things. Perhaps he had not known. Perhaps his instructions had been incomplete. "This is the most recent amendment to his will," I said. "It supersedes the previous version in the matters it addresses. Frances can provide documentation." His son was very still. His older daughter had finally looked up. She was looking at her brother. His younger daughter was looking at me and she had a careful expression on her face, careful in the way of someone who has been holding something for a long time and is only now setting it down. His son asked for a recess. The estate lawyer agreed. We moved into separate rooms, which meant I stood in the hallway by the window that looked out over the parking garage, holding my empty water glass, watching the February sleet streak down the glass. His younger daughter came to stand beside me. She didn't say anything for a while. "I didn't know about the codicil," she finally said. "I know," I said. "He never told any of us." "No." She was quiet. She had her father's way of going quiet when she was thinking something through. I had always liked that about her. "He told me once," she said, "that he hadn't figured it out yet. What was fair? He said he didn't want to hurt anyone." She paused. "I think that's why he didn't say anything. He was still deciding." "He wasn't deciding," I said, not unkindly. "He had decided. He just didn't tell anyone." She nodded. She looked at the sleet. "I'm sorry about how this has gone," she said. "I know," I said again. The meeting resumed and concluded in ways that felt both formal and hollow. The estate lawyer said he would need to review the codicil and consult with the original firm. His son said he wanted to have his own legal review. Nobody used the word contest, not directly, though it moved around the room like weather. I drove home through the same sleet. I stopped at the Tim Hortons. I sat in the parking lot with a medium coffee and I thought about Gordon, the way I had been thinking about him constantly since November. Not the hospital Gordon, not the last months, but the kitchen table Gordon, the Sunday drive Gordon, the man who had found me at 51 and said, "I didn't know this was still possible." He had known what he owed me. He had signed it twice, once when his son had suggested it, not knowing the clause on page 4, and once alone in a West End office, telling a lawyer to write down what he had decided was fair. He had just not known how to say it. Frances called 3 weeks later to tell me that the son had decided not to pursue a formal contest. The cost analysis she suspected had something to do with it. The $60,000 and the Bruce County land were transferred into my name. The house took longer. There were negotiations, some of which were unpleasant, but in the end the clause held and I stayed through the spring. I did not stay forever. That was my own decision, made slowly, over several months. The house had too much Gordon in it and also, paradoxically, too little. By August, I had found a smaller place in Hamilton, closer to Frances's office and closer to my daughter who'd moved back to Ontario. A ground floor unit with a narrow strip of south-facing yard where I planted things in September that will come up in April. His son is not called. I don't expect him to. His older daughter sent a brief, formal email when the estate was settled. I replied briefly and formally, and then I closed the laptop and made tea. His younger daughter called on Gordon's birthday in January. She asked if she could come for coffee sometime. I said yes. We haven't scheduled it yet, but I think we will. There's a thing people say, when it goes the way it went, that you were lucky, that the paper protected you, that Gordon took care of it in the end. Maybe. I think about that. I think about Frances sliding the codicil across the desk and the way my hands weren't quite steady when I picked it up. I think about what it means that Gordon went to that office alone, without telling me, without telling the children, and said, "Write down what I think is right." I think about the fact that he died before he figured out how to say it to anyone's face. That's not luck. That's a man who loved me and also failed me, both in the same breath, both at once, and I have had to find a way to hold those two things without letting either one go. He got it right on paper. I have learned at 68 that paper matters more than people admit, that you cannot assume the people who love you will say the right things in the right rooms, that you have to write it down, have it witnessed, keep a copy, and know where the folder is. Mine is in the top drawer of my desk in the Hamilton apartment, behind the hydro bills and the gardening receipts. I know exactly what it says. I know now to keep it close. I still think about the folder sitting on the passenger seat on the drive to Hamilton. 19 years of a life together, and it came down to that. A manila folder, a highlighted clause on page 4, and whether I had thought to ask the right questions at the right time. I hadn't always. For most of those 19 years, I trusted that love was enough, that the way Gordon looked at me across the kitchen table, the way he said I was the best surprise of his later life, I trusted that those things would hold. I thought that was how it worked. You build something with someone, you show up for them, and the record takes care of itself. What I learned the hard way, and at 68, is that trust without preparation is not faith. It's just hope. And hope, as it turns out, does not hold up well in a fourth-floor lawyer's office with fluorescent lighting and a box of tissues on the table. What protected me wasn't luck. It was Gordon's own quiet decency, that he had gone alone to a West End office and told a lawyer to write down what he believed was right. It was Frances, who had handled my affairs for 20 years and knew which questions to ask. And it was me, finally, sitting at her desk 3 weeks after Gordon died, handing over every document I could find, instead of assuming everything would sort itself out. Gordon got the ethics right. He knew what he owed me, and he put it in writing. That matters. That is what kept me in my own home. But knowing the right thing and saying it clearly are two different things, and his silence on the codicil, his inability to sit his children down and explain, that cost all of us something. Victor's hostility had room to grow in that silence. His older daughter's coolness, too. When people don't know what someone intended, they fill in the gap with what they want to be true. I think about his younger daughter standing beside me at the window, watching the sleet. She said her father hadn't figured out what was fair yet. I think she was wrong about that. He had figured it out. He just hadn't found the courage to say it out loud to the people it would upset. Wisdom without the willingness to act on it only goes so far. The document saved me. The conversation he never had left, wounds that paper cannot close. What I carry with me now is simpler than I expected. Keep your affairs in order, not because you distrust the people you love, but because you respect them enough to be clear. Sitting down with Frances, understanding what I had signed, asking the hard questions even when Gordon was still alive to answer them, that was the work I should have done sooner. I did it eventually. It was enough. Just barely. And the staying, through the meeting, through Victor's coldness, through the long months of negotiation, that was its own kind of strength I didn't know I had until I needed it. Not dramatic strength, not the kind that announces itself, the kind that just keeps showing up, the kind that drives 2 hours through February sleet and sets a folder on the table and says, there are two things. I planted things in September in my Hamilton yard. They will come up in April. That is what I know how to do now. Prepare for what's coming, put it in the ground, and trust the work.